There are files sitting in government vaults right now, in Washington, in Tokyo, in Moscow, in New Delhi, that the public is not allowed to read. Not because they're old, not because they're irrelevant, but because the people in power have decided, decade after decade, that you specifically cannot handle what's inside them. Some of these files are about murders. Some are about experiments on living human beings. Some are about things that flew over military bases and left physical marks on the ground. And some, the ones that keep historians up at night, are about people who just disappeared and governments that know exactly where they went. This is every file the government still won't release. And by the end of this list, you are going to have serious questions about who is actually in charge. Number 8, the assassination files. They finally cracked open JFK Files, USA. Let's start with the one that's been front page news. For over 60 years, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, a murder that happened in broad daylight on a public street in front of hundreds of people, has been wrapped in classified documents that the government refused to release. 6 million pages of records. Think about that number, 6 million, for a man who was shot in a motorcade. In January 2025, Trump signed an executive order demanding full declassification. And in March 2025, over 80,000 pages dropped, unredacted, onto the National Archives website. Researchers are still going through them. And here's what they've already found buried inside. The CIA had been tracking Lee Harvey Oswald, the man officially blamed for the assassination, for years before the shooting. They knew his movements. They knew his contacts. They had files on him and they never told anyone. New documents also revealed the involvement of a Miami-based CIA officer named George Joanides in a student group that had direct contact with Oswald just months before the killing. Joanides had previously lied to investigators about his role. He died in 1990. He was never charged with anything. Here's the question nobody in power wants to answer. If Oswald acted alone, as the official story says, why did it take 62 years, a presidential executive order, and the threat of public outrage to release the evidence? Only 38% of Americans believe the lone gunman story. And even after 80,000 pages, there are still documents being withheld under grand jury secrecy rules and court seals. The file is open. The case is not closed. Number 7, the nuclear disasters Russia pretended didn't happen. Soviet nuclear files, Russia. In 1957, a nuclear waste tank exploded at a secret Soviet facility called Mayak in the Ural Mountains. The explosion scattered radioactive contamination across 20,000 square kilometers, an area larger than the state of New Jersey. The Soviet government said nothing. They evacuated villages quietly in the middle of the night without explanation. They bulldozed contaminated towns and literally removed them from maps. They classified everything. The outside world didn't learn this disaster had even happened until 1976, nearly 20 years later, when a Soviet scientist who had defected revealed the truth. Even then, the Soviet government denied it, and Mayak wasn't even the worst of it. In 1986, you know this one, Chernobyl. Reactor number 4 exploded. The Soviet government's first response was not evacuation. It was silence. Local officials held a May Day parade in Kyiv, 80 miles from the burning reactor, while radiation levels were climbing. Firefighters were sent in without adequate protection and told it was a routine chemical fire. The true death toll from Chernobyl, the full count including long-term cancer deaths, genetic damage, and contaminated water, is still classified in Russia. Official figures say 31 direct deaths. Independent scientists estimate the real number could be anywhere between 60,000 and 1 million people. The Russian government has never opened its full archive. The complete Chernobyl files, the internal communications, the medical records, the dosimetry data for the workers and soldiers sent in to clean up, remain sealed to this day. In 2022, when Russian forces briefly occupied the Chernobyl exclusion zone during the Ukraine war, Ukrainian officials reported that Russian soldiers were digging trenches in the most contaminated soil on Earth. Some of those soldiers later showed signs of radiation exposure. Russia denied it, same playbook, different decade. Number 6, the mystery. The UK military still refuses to explain. Rendlesham Forest Files. UK, December 26, 1980. A U.S. Air Force base in Suffolk, England. RAF Woodbridge. In the early hours of the morning, security personnel see strange lights descending into Rendlesham Forest. They go to investigate. What they find is not a crashed plane, not a weather balloon, not a lighthouse. Multiple trained military personnel, including Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, the deputy base commander, report seeing a metallic triangular craft resting on the forest floor. It's covered in what Halt describes as hieroglyph-like markings. It emits a bright beam of light. Halt records the entire encounter on an audio tape, live as it's happening. Radiation readings at the site are later taken. They come back significantly elevated. Indentations are found in the ground where the object sat. This event goes on for 2 nights. Britain's Ministry of Defense is informed. And then, nothing. The official response is that there is nothing of defense significance in the sighting. The MOD releases only a single sheet of paper as the official record of what happened. One sheet, for a 2-night encounter witnessed by dozens of trained military personnel at a NATO base that housed nuclear weapons. Halt went public in 2010 saying the UK and US governments covered it up. He believes to this day that what he witnessed was extraterrestrial and that the cover-up was deliberate. The complete communications between the UK Ministry of Defense and the US Air Force regarding the incident have never been released. Whatever was in that forest got a 1-page write-off and a filing cabinet, and you are not allowed to see what's actually in the cabinet. Number 5, the freedom fighter whose death file is still locked. Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose Files, India. Here is a mystery that an entire country of 1.4 billion people has been asking for 8 decades. Subhas Chandra Bose, Netaji, was one of the most important figures in India's independence movement. A man so feared by the British that they put him under constant surveillance. A man so dangerous to colonial power that he formed an army, allied with Japan and Germany, and tried to liberate India by force. And then on August 18, 1945, he supposedly died in a plane crash in Taiwan. Supposedly. Here's where it gets strange. 3 separate Indian government commissions were set up to investigate in 1956, 1970, and 2005. None of them could reach a definitive conclusion. The 2005 Mukherjee Commission, after an extensive investigation, concluded that Bose did not die in the plane crash, and that the ashes kept at the Renkoji Temple in Tokyo do not belong to him. The Indian government rejected this report. In 2017, a French historian found a secret French intelligence report stating that Bose was still alive in 1947, 2 years after his supposed death. In 2022, an RTI application was filed requesting the DNA test results of a mysterious holy man known as Gumnami Baba, who many believe was Bose living in hiding in Uttar Pradesh. The government's forensic lab refused to release the results. Their reason? Revealing the DNA report would affect the sovereignty and integrity of the nation. Let that sink in. A DNA test for a man who died in 1945 threatens national integrity. Russia still hasn't released its files on Bose. Japan still hasn't released its files on Bose. And the Indian intelligence files, the ones tracking the most surveilled freedom fighter in the country's history, remain classified. The official story is a plane crash. The evidence says otherwise. And the governments with the answers are not talking. Number 4, the experiments America helped cover up. Unit 731 Files, Japan. What you are about to hear is not a conspiracy theory. It is confirmed, documented, historical fact, and it is one of the most monstrous things any government has ever done and then buried. Between 1936 and 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army ran a secret facility in Manchuria, China. Its official name was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Its real name was Unit 731, and its real purpose was using living human beings as laboratory equipment. Prisoners, mostly Chinese and Korean civilians, but also Russians, Mongolians, and Allied POWs, were referred to internally as Maruta, which means logs, as in, how many logs did we use today? They were infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhoid, and then dissected while still alive to study the progression of the disease in real time. Without anesthesia, people were locked into high-pressure chambers until their eyes popped out of their skulls. They were spun to death in centrifuges. They were strapped to stakes and used as targets for live grenade tests. Pregnant women were infected with syphilis. Limbs were amputated and reattached to opposite sides of the body. At least 3,000 people died in the laboratory alone. Estimates for field tests, where diseases were dropped on Chinese cities, go as high as 500,000. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the commander of Unit 731, General Shiro Ishii, burned most of the records and ordered his staff to disappear into civilian life. They did. Many became senior doctors, professors, and government officials in post-war Japan. And here is the part that makes this a two-government crime. The United States, General Douglas MacArthur specifically, decided not to prosecute anyone from Unit 731. Not a single person. Instead, America secretly traded immunity for the research data. They paid the scientists thousands of yen in stipends. They classified the files, and they used the data. The full archive of Unit 731's experiments, pathology slides, autopsy reports, the names of thousands of victims, remains partially sealed in both Japanese and American archives. Japan didn't officially acknowledge Unit 731's existence until 1984. No apology has ever been issued, no reparations have ever been paid, and the scientists responsible lived long, comfortable, decorated lives. Number 3. Australia's Area 51 in the desert, Pine Gap, Australia. About an hour south of Alice Springs, in the middle of the Australian outback, there is a facility surrounded by 45 massive dome-shaped structures called rhodomays. It's called the Joint Defence Facility Pine Gap. The Australian government calls it a space research facility. What it actually is one of the most powerful surveillance bases on Earth, jointly operated by the CIA, the NSA, the National Reconnaissance Office, and the Australian Signals Directorate. It monitors military activity, intercepts communications, tracks missile launches, and geolocates individual cell phones across the entire Eastern Hemisphere, from the Pacific to the edge of Africa. For most of its history, Australian prime ministers were not told what happened inside. Australian staff were hired as cooks and janitors. The Americans ran everything. In 1975, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam discovered the CIA had been running unauthorized operations on Australian soil through Pine Gap and threatened to expose the facility and close it down. 11 days later, he was removed from office in a constitutional crisis that has never been fully explained. A former CIA officer stated that Whitlam's threat caused, quote, apoplexy in the White House and that a kind of chile was set in motion. The CIA denied involvement. Whitlam himself denied it, but he was gone within days of threatening to pull the plug. In 2024, Pine Gap underwent its largest expansion in history, 10 new satellite antennas constructed in a matter of years, bringing the total to 45. Analysts tracking it via commercial satellite imagery noticed the expansion. Nobody in the Australian government was officially told why. After the 2014 disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, investigators noted that Pine Gap likely had data that could help locate the aircraft. It did not come forward with that data. Everything that happens inside that facility, every conversation intercepted, every phone geolocated, every drone strike coordinated, is classified. The Australian public funds the facility. The Australian public is not told what it does. Number 2, the files that could start a war. Chinese military and biotech research files. China, in late 2019, a new virus emerged in the city of Wuhan, China. It spread across the entire world, killed millions of people, and collapsed the global economy. 4 years later, the question of where it came from is still officially unanswered. And the files that might answer it are locked inside a Chinese government database that was taken offline in September 2019, 3 months before the outbreak was publicly announced, and has never been restored. The Wuhan Institute of Virology, located 8 miles from the first known cluster of cases, was studying bat coronaviruses with U.S. funding. It maintained a database of over 22,000 viral samples. That database went dark in September 2019. Chinese authorities have refused every international request to access it. Scientists who have attempted to investigate the origin have been threatened, silenced, or had their research suppressed. But here is what makes this entry different from simple pandemic politics. The files on China's military biotech research extend far beyond Wuhan. China's People's Liberation Army has been running classified biotech programs that multiple Western intelligence agencies have flagged as weapons development. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, has collectively identified Chinese military research files as among the most strategically sensitive classified material in the world. In 2023, a leaked document from a Chinese state contractor, iSoon, revealed the company had been hacking government databases across 20 countries, including India, Taiwan, South Korea, the UK, and the US, for years. The Chinese government's response was to arrest the people who leaked it and say nothing. No Western government has ever seen the full contents of the Wuhan database. No independent scientist has ever been allowed to audit the Wuhan lab. And the files that could settle the debate about where the pandemic started, the files that could either confirm natural origin or confirm the worst-case scenario, remain behind a firewall that no government on Earth has managed to breach. Number 1. The system watching all of us right now, global mass surveillance programs. In June 2013, a 29-year-old NSA contractor named Edward Snowden walked out of his office in Hawaii with a hard drive full of classified documents and handed them to journalists. What those documents revealed changed how the world understood the relationship between governments and their citizens forever. Governments weren't just watching terrorists and foreign enemies, they were watching everyone. PRISM, a program that gave the NSA direct access to the servers of Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, and Yahoo. Every search, every message, every photo uploaded, X-key score, a program that allowed analysts to search through the private emails, browser histories, and online chats of virtually any person on Earth in real time, with no prior authorization. Muscular, a program that secretly tapped into the private fiber optic cables connecting Google and Yahoo data centers worldwide, intercepting hundreds of millions of records per day. And at the center of all of it, Echelon, a surveillance network operated by the Five Eyes Alliance that has been intercepting satellite and radio communications since the 1960s. Pine Gap feeds into it. Britain's GCHQ feeds into it. Canadian and New Zealand intelligence feed into it. Together, they form a web that covers virtually every form of electronic communication on the planet. The Snowden files were the first hard proof that this system existed. But here is what most people don't realize. Snowden only got a fraction of it. He had access to NSA files, not CIA files, not the full GCHQ archive, not the classified annexes of every surveillance treaty the Five Eyes nations have quietly signed since 2013. The programs he exposed were modified and renamed after the leak. New programs replaced them. The legal frameworks governments use to authorize mass surveillance, the actual text of the secret court orders, the classified interpretations of surveillance law, the internal audits of what was collected, are still classified. The 2025 renewal of FISA Section 702, the legal backbone of American mass surveillance, passed through Congress with the classified annex intact. Nobody outside the intelligence community knows what's in that annex. Your phone is in your pocket right now. It knows your location. It has your contacts. It carries years of your messages. And somewhere in a data center you will never be allowed to visit, in a file you will never be allowed to read, a record of you exists that you did not consent to and cannot access. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a confirmed, documented legal fact. And the governments running those programs have decided unanimously across party lines, across borders, across decades, that you do not need to know the details. Every file on this list is real. Every cover-up is documented. Every government involved has publicly confirmed at least part of what it was hiding, usually decades too late, usually only because someone forced their hand. Kennedy's files needed a presidential order. Unit 731's crimes needed a Cold War deal to stay buried. Snowden needed a thumb drive and a flight to Hong Kong. The pattern is the same every time. The files exist, the truth is in them, and the only thing standing between you and it is a classification stamp in a government that has decided, on your behalf, without asking, that some things are better left locked away. If this video made you feel like you need to start asking more questions, hit that like button, share this with someone who still thinks governments tell the whole truth, and subscribe because this is just the surface.